we'll be going over the installation of your track hammer quad conversion for your Polaris slingshot. Please remember at all times to do so in a safe manner, especially when having the vehicle jacked up and the rear swing arm of the slingshot removed. Be sure to place jack stands under the frame rails on both sides of the slingshot in a manner that keeps the slingshot from moving and it can't fall off the jack stands. You'll be moving around quite a bit on the back of this, so you'll want to make sure this is secure. Raise the slingshot so that the rear tire is slightly off the ground, doesn't have to be a long ways, and place a jack stand on the frame rails on both sides of the drive shaft, just in front of the swing arm on your slingshot. We highly recommend that you chock the front tires, as you'll be removing the parking brake assembly and the entire swing arm and right angle drive assembly. There'll be nothing to keep the slingshot from rolling if you don't chock the front tires. Next, we'll be removing the stock components on the rear of the slingshot. Some of these components will be reused. The ones that are reused will be noted here. Feel free to pause the video at any time so that you can follow the written instructions. If you have any questions, please follow your owner's manual for factory specifications on part removal. When removing the swing arm, I find it easier to just leave the tire in place. Makes it easier to roll the swing arm around, and you don't have the whole weight of the swing arm flopping down on you when you unbolt it. Remove the brake line from the caliper. Wrap a piece of plastic around the end of it with some electrical tape or a rubber band so that you don't have brake fluid dripping all over your painted parts. Set the caliper brake line aside as you'll be rehooking this brake line up to the track hammer brake manifold. Remove the parking brake cable from the caliper. Set it to the side. You'll be completely removing this cable later. Remove the two lower plastic covers, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. The driver's side covers your battery. The passenger side covers some access bolts that you'll need to be able to get to on the right angle drive. Now you'll remove your belt. You do this by loosening the two adjustment bolts on the right angle drive and sliding the right angle drive rearward until the belt has enough slack to pull off the pulley and completely remove. upper shock mount bolt. There's an access behind the passenger seat storage compartment, a small hole located near the top where you can get at this bolt with a 15mm socket. Be sure to save this bolt because you'll reuse it later. Remove the lower shock bolt and then remove the shock itself and set it aside. Unplug the traction control wire. It is located just below the swing arm. Keep track of where this wire is located. You'll be plugging back into it later. Remove the large 22mm swing arm pivot bolt. This requires an Allen wrench socket that was supplied with your kit. Once this bolt is slid out of place, the swing arm will roll away from the slingshot. You can now remove the U-joint straps that hold the drive shaft to the right angle drive. Next, we'll be removing the right angle drive. Do so by removing the last two right angle drive mount bolts that are on each side of the pulley. The drive is heavy, be careful. Don't be underneath it when those bolts come out. It's often handy to use a jack under the drive to lower it down safely and set it aside. At this point, we can remove the drive shaft from the transmission. Save the 6 bolts that hold the CV shaft adapter to the transmission. You'll be reusing this with the TrackHammer transmission adapter later. You're now ready to start with the installation of the TrackHammer kit. Go slow and take your time, it'll be easier than you think. Double check everything as you go along. Don't fully tighten or torque any bolts until the entire kit is in place. Once all the stock components have been removed, mount the transmission adapter plate using the 6 bolts you saved from the stock CV shaft. For the purpose of this video, the rear differential has been removed to make it easier to visualize how the torsion box of the TrackHammer rear kit slides into the frame where the swing arm and right angle drive used to reside. It's easiest to bolt your wheels directly to your hubs and roll the kit directly into place. You'll need to tip the upper shock mount tube down so that it slides through the hole in the rear plastic of the slingshot.
That's the bolt.
Again, if you put the wheels directly onto the kit, it'll make it a lot easier to just roll the kit around, and you can raise or lower the slingshot and raise and lower the rear kit so that the shock upper mounting tube slides into the previous upper shock mount. Slide the upper shock mounting tube into the original shock mount place using a screwdriver to align the holes or the supplied drift pin. This will make it easy. Tolerance at this mount is very, very tight. It's easiest to use the supplied drift pin in order to line up the bolt hole. Once it's lined up, slide the bolt through and use a 15mm socket to tighten the bolt. Once the frame box is in place and the upper shock mount bolt has been installed, install the upper and lower driver's side mounting bolts. These are special bolts that have a portion of the head removed to lock them in place. Use the supplied lock nuts inside the frame mounting box to tighten these bolts. Do not fully tighten until all bolts are in place. Next, slide the swing arm pivot adapter into the swing arm pivot hole and place the bolt and washer through the adapter. The driver's side and passenger side are different. Pay close attention to make sure you have the proper side. They are labeled as such. Once the adapter and bolt are in place, slide on the lock nut and partially tighten. Don't fully tighten until all bolts are in place. Now move to the passenger side. Slide the swing arm pivot adapter in, just like you did on the driver's side. Again, these are different sizes. And loosely tighten the nut. After you've put the pivot adapter in, you can place the last two bolts in the forward right angle drive mounting holes.
You have a quarter 20 bolt? Quarter 20 by...
There are 6 total bolts. One bolt.
Quarter 20 by 1.
Once the track hammer kit is fully tightened and torqued, we can install the drive shaft. There are 4 bolts with washers and bushings that go through the yoke onto the transmission adapter that you previously installed. Make sure the bushings and washers are used with these bolts. Use blue Loctite when installing these bolts. The slip joint side of the drive shaft goes towards the transmission. Using the bolts, bushings, and washers, attach the slip joint side yoke to the transmission adapter previously installed on the transmission. There's a raised centering post that makes sure that the bolt holes line up and that the drive shaft is perfectly centered on the adapter plate. Once you've loosely tightened all 4 bolts, go ahead and torque these bolts to the specs provided. At the rear of the drive shaft, pull the drive shaft towards the rear differential and install the 2 U-joint straps at the rear differential. Use blue Loctite on the bolts for the U-joint straps. Remove the stock e-brake cable from the parking brake handle. In order to do this, you have to remove the 2 bolts that hold the e-brake handle to the frame. In Polaris's wisdom, they installed the pin from the back side so the pin cannot come out without removing these bolts. Once you remove the bolts, remove the pin, pull the factory e-brake cable off the parking brake handle, and install the e-brake cable that is attached to your track hammer kit. You'll need to adjust this cable at the adjustment bolts provided for the proper e-brake tension. Put the pin back in place, put the 2 bolts back in place that hold the parking brake handle to the frame, and make this parking brake adjustment so that you get the proper tension on your parking brake. Next, run your factory brake line back to the brake manifold located directly under the rear differential. Use the supplied banjo bolt and crush washers to install the brake line to the manifold. Run the brake line along the frame rails and zip tie so that it's out of the way of everything. You'll need to slightly twist the metal portion of the brake line so that the mounting flange lays flat against the underside of the torsion box. There's a 1/4 inch bolt that goes through a hole in the underside of the torsion box that lines up with this mounting flange. Be very careful twisting this flange that you do not break the metal brake line. Once this is done, you can bleed the brake system. It's easiest to use a vacuum bleeder to get brake fluid to the rear calipers, but can be performed manually the old-fashioned way if you don't have a vacuum bleeder. After bleeding the rear brakes, be sure to go ahead and bleed the front brakes, as the Slingshot is notorious for spongy brakes. Bleeding your brakes helps tremendously. Once the brakes are bled, and be sure the brakes are bled, you can plug in the traction control wire that is located below the swing arm. At this point, you need to take your Slingshot with its new track hammer kit to your nearest alignment shop for a proper alignment. Tell them to use Corvette C4 specs for the alignment. It's very common for the traction control light to come on in the first 50 miles or so after you've installed the kit. This can often happen just intermittently, but will go away as the control module learns the new sensor and toner ring. Again, for the first 50 miles or so, disregard the traction control light. If it continues after that, be sure to give us a call. Be sure to call us if you have any questions during your installation. I'm always here to help and eager to answer questions and talk to clients who have decided to make track hammer part of their riding enjoyment. You can call me anytime during your installation. My number's available on the website at trackhammer.com. Enjoy, ride safe, and hammer down.